Hey everyone, this is Andrew and welcome back to my home studio. In this video I'm going to go over 5 easy ways to improve your home mixes. Let's go. Number 1, which I think is the most important element of this, is that you should have good home studio monitors. If you're mixing in headphones, you can get by with that for a while, but eventually you're going to get to a point where it just doesn't really work anymore. Now, there's always going to be exceptions to this rule. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who will say, I've been doing this for years, people tell me they love my mixes, and I do it all in headphones. And that's fine. If that works for you, that's great. But you're in the minority. People pretty much overwhelmingly agree that you should use bigger studio monitors to do your mixes. Now, you don't have to go crazy and buy like $2,000 monitors. If you just buy like $300 KRK Rocket studio monitors, then that'll work. The monitors that I have, I bought probably 4 years ago or so, maybe less. They're Mackie MK2s, I believe. I can't really find the exact model and it's not clear on the monitors, but bought them at Guitar Center. They had a sale. They were $350 a speaker, regular $450 a speaker, and I've been using them ever since, and I love them. The minute I started using real monitors is when my mixes went from, like here to like here, just instantly. Tip number 2 is have some kind of acoustic treatment for your room. So what I have behind my computer here is right behind the computer on the wall. I have some high-frequency acoustic foam. To the sides of it, kind of in the corners of the way my room's made, I have some relatively big bass traps, and these are kind of behind my speakers. And I position them there because typically you want to have your bass traps in corners, and also if you have your speakers a little too close to the wall, your bass frequencies are emitting from the back, and they kind of cause like a standing wave in the corners there. So I put the bass traps there to be more effective. However, they will reduce bass frequencies around the entire room. And then in addition to that, on the wall roughly behind where I am, the next free wall space behind me, my computer's here, behind me is there, I have another set of high-frequency acoustic foam. On this wall I have high-frequency acoustic foam, and in all the corners I have foam bass traps. And I don't have like 100% of my walls covered. I probably have 10% of my walls covered. Having a lot of stuff in your room in itself can either help or hurt your cause. If you have an empty room and you clap, you might hear some kind of metallic, slapback effect. And that's a sign that you have some high frequency echoes in your room. And what'll happen is that when you're mixing on studio monitors, when you're playing the music from your speaker, if you can see this one, it's gonna come out and some of it's gonna hit your ear. Another part of it's going to go that way, bounce off my window, bounce off my gear, and then hit my ear. Another part of it's going to go behind my head, it's going to bounce off that wall, bounce off that wall, and then come to my ear. Or go to the other ear. And the more reflections you have in your room, and the longer those waves can bounce back and forth, you'll have a buildup of certain frequencies that's dependent on the geometry of your room. And this can cause a problem, because when you're trying to mix with a reference that's flat with your new good studio monitors, but the problem that happens is your room isn't flat. And you have echoes, which can cause other issues too, aside from a frequency response issue. It can cause an issue where you're hearing the sound, like, again, doubled kind of slightly after it. And that can cause issues when you're trying to deal with lining. It'll sound mushy almost. It's hard to describe, but in general, if you want to get some acoustic foam, try to get acoustic foam that's at least 2 inches thick. You can find this on Amazon for relatively cheap. You'll probably want to spend like $100 or $200 at minimum. Try to get some bass traps, again, $100 or so. Put the bass traps in all the corners of your rooms. Try to get the high frequency acoustic foam to be placed on all the parallel surfaces, because that's the places where the sound's going to just bounce back and forth. The speed of sound is very fast, but so that means that in a second, if the energy from the sound isn't dissipated, it's just bouncing back and forth, and your ear is going to be picking up on that if it keeps coming back and echoing from different places. Tip number 3 is to use a reference mix and take breaks. It may sound like 2 steps in one, but really it's kind of all about the same idea, whereas you want to reset your ear. If you're in the same mix for an extended period of time, you kind of become numb to the mix. Same thing if you're writing with the same piece of music for a while, you stop thinking of new ideas. It's exactly the same thing. You get some kind of ear fatigue almost. So let's say for every half an hour you take a 5-minute break, and in that 5-minute break, you might sit in silence, but it's also useful to just listen to some kind of music that's in the same style that you're mixing. if you're mixing for an extended period of time, what can actually happen is that you start going down a rabbit hole. So you'll get, let's say, your guitar, and you might get the mids, and you might scoop them a bit, and then next thing you know, you go to your other guitar, you get the mids, and you scoop them a bit, then you go to your bass, and you do something with that, and then you don't have any reference in that time frame, so you're listening, and maybe later you go back to that part and you listen, you're like, oh, I kind of want to scoop that frequency a bit, and then you do it again, and then it sounds good to you because you've been doing it for so long and in the same time period that you become numb to what the changes are. It's kind of like if someone comes by and they like start punching you in the arm really hard for like 10 times, and then after someone comes and they just like gently poke your arm, you may not feel it at all, or maybe you will because you're bruised, but the idea is kind of the same, whereas if you're doing all these big changes back to back and then all of a sudden you want to be able to go in and fine-tune a subtle detail, you're probably not going to notice it if you've been dealing in extremes for a bit. So it's good to take breaks, and it's good to have a reference piece kind of in between when you're mixing to make sure you don't go out of control. Tip number 4 is that after you mix your song for the day, in whatever time period you had to mix, export your song and send it to your phone or whatever method you want to use. I'm assuming your phone, put it on Dropbox or something. And then, next time you're driving, say the next day you're driving to work, play the mix in your car. And let's say you're at work and you have the ability to listen to music or something while you're on the computer. Just play the mix and listen, just kind of in the background. Or whenever you have a chance, listen on headphones. It's a good idea to sometimes play the mix just right off your phone speakers. And the reason for this is that you want to try to simulate every possible way that a listener will listen to your music. You might be mixing on these great studio monitors in this great acoustically treated room, but your audience isn't going to be listening to your music on great studio monitors in a great acoustic room. They're going to be listening on whatever they have available at the time. A lot of people do listen on headphones. A lot of people do listen in their cars. And a lot of people do listen on their phone speakers. So it's good to check, at least, and make sure that there's nothing absolutely out of whack. Now, there's nothing you can do to get a perfect mix across all of those different ways that people can listen to music, but you can make sure that there's nothing totally drastically different happening in the most common ways that people listen to music, namely their car, headphones, speakers, and crappy desktop speakers as well. Now, this last step does require a little bit of work, but it actually saves you work in the long run, so I still think it's a pretty easy way to improve your mixes. What can happen is that if you have a pretty ambitious song, you might have 200 tracks or so. And the reason why you can get up to these high track counts isn't necessarily that you need them, it's just that when you're recording, a lot of times it's easier to loop sections on a different track than having them all at one vocal track. Even though the song might only have one continuous vocal part, it's good to have some lead in before and some trail out after to avoid missing any audio when the loop repeats. So what happens to me is that even though there might only be 3 different vocal parts across the entire song, I might have 30 vocal tracks. And even though my drummer only has one set of drums going through the entire song, there might be, in the case of a recent song, I think there was like 120 drum tracks, because he had to track stuff, in some stuff in pieces, but also he didn't have enough inputs into his audio interface, and it was a catastrophe. But the point I'm trying to make in here is that it's good to consolidate your mix before you actually get into your mix. If you try to mix your song and there's 150 tracks, you're going to get very overwhelmed, you're going to get very tired. Every time you want to say, oh hey, I want to boost my vocals as a whole, if you don't have everything grouped in some easy way, you're going to be doing all these different tracks. If you want to change the EQ on a vocal part and it's spread across 5 tracks, you have to do it to 5 tracks. And there's different ways to do this. The first way I'd recommend is that, first of all, edit all your stuff before you get involved in mixing. If you have to do vocal edits like cropping, pitch correction, if you have to get drums and move some hits around that are incorrect, do all that ahead of time. Then when you go into your mix, get your drums, and if it's spread across 30 tracks, consolidate it to one instrument across the whole song. There's like 1 snare, 1 bass drum, maybe 2. But if you're gonna do 2, then you get into the situation where instead of doing all the effect processing like compression, EQ, limiting, whatever you're doing, route them to a bus. And then what you can do is the audio from both of those tracks gets routed to that same bus, and then you can put all your processing on that one bus. So this can easily get a 200 track song and reduce it down to something like 50 tracks. and then it becomes much more easy to work with. And then you can still keep subdividing things then again. Like maybe you have guitar tracks that were split into 2 pieces for every single one part because you track one take and then track a separate one. But then you doubled your guitar, and then you have like 4 stacks of lead riffs. What you can do is you can get those 2 guitar tracks, mix them down into one, and then you have 2 separate rhythm tracks. You can get those, you can run them to a bus. Now you got 4 tracks going down to 1. You can get those 4 lead riffs you had. You can get all the mix kind of perfect ahead of time, and then send those to a bus. And then now you can control all those 2, 4, 8 tracks with just 2 sliders. And that can make life a lot easier when you're mixing. You already have to make a lot of decisions. You don't want to add unnecessary decisions that could be made ahead of time without affecting the final product. Alright, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe for more. I upload videos every single Friday. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Also, if you disagree or have any experience with any of these tips, share it. I noticed that on the videos that I have that have a lot of comments, there's often a lot of people helping other people inside the comments. Some person will say, oh, I'm having trouble, deciding on what studio monitors to get. And someone might come in and say, oh, I have these. Another person might come in and say, I have these. And then that person now has 2 good options to go research. And I find that can help a lot. So leave any info that you have in the comments. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.